Bum bum bottom 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 bum bum
Doobie doobie da da da, doobie doobie da da da, doobie doobie da da da, doobie doobie da da, doobie doobie da da, doobie doobie da da da, ba-da-da 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 ba-ba-ba. Doobie doobie da da da.
You are now in session with the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast. I'm Lisa Gullickson.
And I'm Brad Gullickson.
And each month we evaluate a different iconic romance within the four-color realm. In this episode, our chance to reinvent ourselves. You don't think we're cool because we're always cooped up inside reading nerdy stuff and we barely go outside during the day? Reading isn't nerdy. We love the stars, which only come out at night in our Creator Corner. We're talking to YA maven Kami Garcia about Teen Titans Starfire from DC Comics.
Yeah, happy Friday, everyone. Happy Black Friday. Are you in line right now waiting to get inside Walmart or Best Buy or whatever to get some giant appliance? Well, if so, we're glad to be there with you, encouraging capitalism.
But don't blow all of your dough on Black Friday. Save a little bit for Small Business Saturday. And don't forget to hit up your local comic book store. We know that all of the comic book stores around us are having some kind of deal or sale around this time. And it's the perfect opportunity to get those creative gift-giving juices a-flowing because we want to make sure we give everybody on our list something comic book celebratory. And we don't want to be panicking last minute and buying books online this year.
Yeah, and just like last year, Lisa and I have put together a Comic Book Couples Counseling Comic Book Holiday Gift Guide, which you can find a link to in your show notes right now. It's actually one of my favorite things that we publish on the website, but it's always a scramble to get it done in time for Black Friday, and I stress out a lot about what to include in a comic book holiday gift guide.
Say more about that, because I'm excited to really get into it.
Well, I love gift guides. I used to obsess over Eric Vespe's holiday gift guide. He's a culture writer, and he would do one that was movie themed, and it was broken into, cheap, affordable, and expensive. And I really aspire for our comic book gift guide to match that, the energy of his gift guides. And I also want to make sure that we're doing a comic book gift guide. Often when you Google these things, what comes up are a bunch of Legos and MCU related trinkets. And I want to have trinkets on our list. You'll find trinkets on our list, but I also want to highlight the books that I feel like did not get enough love this year, or just some of the best titles that you can pick up.
I think a lot of the time those gift guides are for the person who has someone in their life who loves comic books, and they're like, what do I get that person because I'm not into comic books? Our mission is the comic book gift guide for the comic book lover to give either other comic book lovers or people who do not yet love comic books. Those are the gifts that I want to put and include on this list.
Yeah, absolutely. We've probably already talked about this on the podcast at some point, but you have a very specific philosophy when it comes to giving gifts. Can you talk about that again?
So the way I like to talk about it is a gift should be a bridge, right? A lot of times when we're thinking about gifts for other people, we go what does this person want? And then you go and you ask them for a list, or you give them a gift card to a store that you don't know, but you know that they like, right? Where when I give a gift, I think about what is the thing that this person and I have in common, and what is the gift that would go on that bridge. So, for example, if I have a friend who loves baking, I would get them, and I love comic books, I also love baking, right? So I would get them a copy of Bloom, I would get them a rolling pin, and then maybe if they have a cat, I'd get them a sticker with a cat holding a donut. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you do the package a present.
Oh, yeah. when I do just like a book, I'm like, that book now looks lonely. It needs a friend, and that friend needs to be something other than a book. It gets really expensive.
Yeah, it really
actually.
does.
It's a problem.
I love that, and I think you've made me a better gift giver as a result. Of course, our savings have depleted also.
Yeah, Brad sometimes does like the weird third option where Brad buys someone something that he likes.
Yeah.
And that's the end of it. He's like, I like this, and you should also have it in your home.
To me, I see that also as a bridge, though, right?
Yeah.
It's like you have a passion for something, and you would like this person that you love to join you in the conversation around that passion.
Right. But it is
it
hard.
Can backfire.
It is hard
or
if
can
they
fall
are
flat.
not at all interested.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, fair. So I don't want to recreate our entire gift guide right now for our listeners, but I do want to highlight some of our favorites from it, maybe. Lisa, is there something in the gift guide that jumps out to you?
I think an amazing gift to somebody in your life who loves Disney, loves memoirs, isn't afraid of things being too saucy, too sexy. I think I'm so glad we had this time together.
Yeah.
Makes an amazing gift. It's a huge book. It's a beautiful tome. It's by Maurice Bellecoupe, who is an amazing artist. And if you wanted to pair that, you could go to ColourPop, and they have princess-themed palettes that would be perfect, like makeup palettes.
Not to spoil our end of the year episodes, which are just weeks away, but I'm so glad we had this time together, is going to feature prominently in our Stampies.
And I cannot wait to celebrate that book because it is so flippin' good.
I want to go two places on the gift guide. I want to go all the way down to the bottom to the expensive section and then jump back up to the cheap section. In the expensive area, we see David Mazzucchelli's Batman Year One Artist Edition. If you're an original art maniac, no doubt you've been waiting for this moment for IDW to get the DC license to put out books like this one, even though David Mazzucchelli's like, in the introduction telling you this is ridiculous. Without the colors, this book doesn't work. Yeah, we hear you, David. We appreciate you, David. But also, we really want to look at your pencils and inks. It's $150. That's a lot to spend on yourself or on a loved one. And if you can't hack that this year, go back up to the cheap section of the gift guide. Look at our very first item. It is the Absolute Batman #1 Noir edition. Mm-hmm. This is $4.99, and it's not just a black and white comic. They didn't just remove Frank Martin's colors from Absolute Batman #1. These are the original scans of Nick Dragata's art. So this is the cheapest artist edition you can get. Look at the image on the gift guide. Look at the brush strokes on the hand on that splash page. That's what we want as original art maniacs, and you can get it for $4.99.
A deal and a steal.
Plus, there's there's also the Batman and Robin Year One black and white noir edition from Chris Samnee. And then just this past Wednesday, they released Absolute Wonder Woman in noir. I want DC to be doing more and more of this stuff. So let's encourage them with a little sales.
It's a great way to buy the same book twice.
Yes. But I would argue have a totally different experience.
100%. And guess what? You could pair those together. You buy the...
If you're buying the $150 book, you might as well also buy the $4.99 book.
No, what I'm saying is you buy the regular issue and you also buy the noir.
Oh, yeah.
Here's a great gift if you have one of those sexy, witchy friends. I'm blushing a little bit to do sexy books. I'm not cool enough. I wish that I did.
You're blushing because you've recommended two hot and heavy books?
Yeah, I did. Okay. I did. But I stand by the choices.
Yeah, you should.
I stand by them.
They're good ones.
So, Distillery has put out some really beautiful editions of Somna by Becky Cloonan and Tula Lotay. And you can pair that with a really nice witchy scented candle or bundled sage, maybe throw some crystals in there. That's a cute gift.
I love it.
I have one more. Do you have one more?
I always have one more.
Okay, you go.
I would like to point people to the Folio Society. They have been publishing some incredible reproductions of classic Marvel comics. One of my biggest pet peeves with modern trade paperbacks is they're always on that glossy paper and the colors just don't look good at all. But the Folio Society reproduces them on these matte pages, and it's not quite newsprint, but it's not too far away from newsprint. And they've just published a book called Marvel Unforgettable Stories, and it's edited by Patton Oswalt and Jordan Bloom. I think it's obvious that Lisa and I love to curate. That's one of the reasons why we do this podcast. And it's fun to find a collection that is actually a curation. Like, here's Patton and Jordan, and they're saying these are the best Marvel stories, and here's why. So it presents the stuff and then gives a little thought into why these stories have been presented. It's $100, a little expensive, but again, Folio Society makes a hearty and pretty product.
The last little spoiler I'm going to give for our gift guide is perfect for someone who likes to read things in digest size, and it is the Book Nook Reading Valet. So I'm a person who, like, if I put a bookmark in a book and then I put it back on the shelf, or let's be honest, putting it in one of the piles, I will never see that book again.
Right.
But with the Book Nook Reading Valet, it's like a shrine to what you are currently reading. So it's a beautiful wood object that has kind of like a
steeple?
Well, yeah, over which a gentle slope over which you can lay your book open. So, like, if it's like a gingerbread house, it would be like the roof.
Yeah.
And then it has a nice place to put your mug of warm drink. And like, I think that would be a really cute gift paired with one of your favorite manga. For example, Search and Destroy Volume 1 from Fantagraphics. I freaking love this book. Or one, like, DC is putting out a bunch of like classic comics digest size. I think those paired together, man, what a generous, thoughtful gift.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, please take a look at the gift guide. If you see something on there that you enjoy, let us know. But also if you feel like there should be an item that should be on the list, let us know about that too, because we can update this all holiday long.
We're really excited about like handmade stuff. Like if you have an Etsy store or you have a small business that sells comic book related stuff, man, we would love to include that on our list.
So now let's transition into the main topic of today's episode. We're chatting with Kami Garcia about Teen Titans Starfire. Lisa and I have a true passion for YA and all ages comics. And I think a big reason for that is because they tend to be theme forward, message forward, perfect comic book couples counseling comics.
We love what DC has been doing with their YA line, and they have been consistently putting out bangers. I Am Not Starfire by Marika Tamaki and Yoshi Yoshitani. Galaxy the Prettiest Star by Jadzia Axelrod and Vash Taylor. Barda by Ngozi Ukazu. These are amazing books. And of course, everything that Kami Garcia and Gabriel Picolo have been doing with the Teen Titans. In fact, pick up 2 or 3 of these, wrap them together, throw in some lip smackers or whatever teens are into today. What an amazing gift.
And what I like so much about what Kami Garcia does is she takes like the model of a John Hughes film and then plants it atop a superhero story, a Teen Titans story, but then she adds so much of her own life experience into it.
Her life experience having once been a teen, but also like as a person who has meaningfully interacted with teens. She comes from an education background, which we get into, and she is a creative who really does think about her audience from an empathetic place the entire time that she's creating, which I think is so, so important for these YA books.
At the start of Teen Titans Starfire, we meet Kori, the title character, working at a Santa Monica beach club, feeling incredibly isolated. She does not connect with the teen scene around her. That frustrates her very much so, especially since her sister Kira is so incredibly popular. But at the heart of this story is the fact that Kori is dealing with Ehlers Danlos Syndrome, an invisible illness that Kami Garcia shares as well. And the action kicks off when a pharmaceutical rep shows up and invites both Kori and Kira to participate in a clinical trial.
This conversation mostly focuses around Teen Titans Starfire and writing for teens, but we also touch on her middle grade graphic novel Mixed Up, which talks about dyslexia and how that affects your self-esteem and your functioning in that tender, like, middle grade time, which I remember being, like, completely awful.
Yeah, and that book is going to see release early next year in January.
From Kami, we learned a lot more than we anticipated about the ethos behind this DC YA line, but I think the books that have been made are a testament to it. They are so good. So we're super excited for you to listen to this chat.
Kami, welcome to Comic Book Couples Counseling. Hello.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. We are recording just outside of Washington, D.C. in Reston, Virginia. And we know you spent several years teaching in Washington, D.C. And I think where Lisa and I would like to begin this conversation is with how that experience as a teacher has informed your writing.
Absolutely. So I actually taught in Capitol Heights, Maryland, which is on the Maryland, D.C. line.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, very underserved community. And I am actually also outside of DC. I'm in Annapolis right now. We're not
Okay.
that far apart. So I was a teacher for 17 years before I wrote my first young adult prose novel on a dare from 7 of my students. And, you know, my entire writing career has been informed by teaching and my students. And really, I have them to thank for, you know, my writing career. You know, I spent a lot of time with kids and teenagers, and I also think that that was a very formative time for me as a person. So I remember it being a teenager very vividly. But I think also, so even though I taught elementary school, most of my career I've also worked with at-risk boys in junior high and high school. And, you know, when I lived in LA, I worked with Write Girl, which is an amazing nonprofit that works with, where writers work with, you know, kids in local junior high, high school. So I just spent most of my life like around teenagers and kids, and I feel more comfortable with them, you know, like I like nerdy adults because those are like my people. But in the, you know, when you're not writing comics, you don't spend a lot of time with nerdy adults. You spend time with like normal adults with like boring normal adult jobs that like I cannot relate to. So I spent all my time, you know, with kids, and I also love kids because they're really honest and authentic. You know, like even when they're hiding things, they're still more authentic than adults. And there's a kind of honesty that happens with kids that I don't think you get as often with adults. And so what I'm really, and I also love, you know, the teenage years, like you're figuring out who you are. And I also think like it's a time that's really important because you have all these other people trying to tell you who to be and define you. And all of my stories, whether they're prose or comics, you know, are really about my teen stuff is really about like defining yourself, finding your found family, defining yourself, being brave enough to be the person you are. And that just aligns really well with writing superheroes, you know, because that's very much what superheroes are about. But that is really kind of the brand of what I'm always putting out there for kids, because I think that it's important, and also like it's a hard thing to do. You know, it's hard to be brave enough to be yourself.
We've heard about this dare situation that your students proposed to you to get out there and write your first book. Can you expand on that legend a little bit?
Yeah. So it wasn't even to write a book. I was teaching Miss Fantasy Book Club, and the kids were talking about kind of how they were tired of seeing the same thing, you know, vampires, werewolves. This was back in 2007. And why couldn't someone create their own supernaturals, you know? And the girls were also sick of like the boy character always having the powers and the girl being like, you know, the one who's like, tripping and falling and getting rescued. So Margaret Stoll, my best friend, and I went to lunch and we were discussing this. And she was a woman very early on in the video game industry, when there weren't a lot of women. She had her own she was a developer. And so she created worlds. I was a fantasy reader. So we were talking about like, why wouldn't someone create their own, kind of supernaturals? Like that would be the fun part. And we kind of like just were, spitballing and came up with all these ideas. And we went back and like told, the teenagers like these ideas that we had for not really just like, a possible story was what we called it. And they were just like, yeah, those are great ideas, but like you'll never do it. You'll never write any of it. So I mean, I especially like as teachers do not, we do not want to be challenged and lose bets to our students. So we started writing and we wrote like serialized fiction where every night we would send them chapters and they would read them in the morning. And at the end of, a little over 12 weeks, we called it the story, not a book. I mean, it was a book,
Mhm.
but we didn't call it that. It was a Word document. And there wasn't a lot of self-publishing back then. Like it was like Hugh Howey and a few people. So we didn't know anything about self-publishing, and we both had careers. So we weren't trying to become writers. We were going to put it up on a website for free for people to read. And a friend of ours, who's a middle grade author named he writes under pseudonymous Bosch. He sent it to his agent in New York without telling us, which is how we got an agent. And then eventually the book sold, and it blew up in a big way. And when it blew up and was on the New York Times list and, debuted on Publishers Weekly and, international lists, like I was still in the classroom teaching. I took
Mhm.
my third grade class to Barnes and Noble, like on a field trip to see the book.
That's so fun.
Yeah. So
That's
like,
so
I
fun.
mean, like this was like, again, like, not it, like we were not trying to find careers. Margie owned, a developer, like a video game company. Like she spent 24/7, like making video games. So, it was like a really I mean, we always say if the two of us had tried to write a best-selling novel, we would have failed like huge because like we're just like it's only by accident that we could do something like that.
Mhm.
But I also equate that to Titans because sometimes you work with someone who you just like your vision for something clicks so perfectly and it is lightning in a bottle. And when I had already pitched the entire Teen Titans series to DC and they were greenlit, we are going to do it. And when I needed an artist, the big premise of my series was these teenagers are going to look like regular kids. They're going to dress like regular kids. They're going to have they're not going to be orange or green. I want them to be able to be in high school and no one to know they have powers. And so as I was doing this, um, and then I came across actually on Pinterest because I'm like old and that was my, social media of choice. I came across Gabriel's fan art and they were in regular sneakers and clothes. I was like, this is exactly what I pitched. And, he and I talked and like it became very clear very early on working with him that we really had the same vision. Like we wanted people to fall in love with the characters we loved. We wanted them to be relatable and we wanted to get to know them on a more personal level. And I think when that happens, it's like, I bring my chocolate, he brings his peanut butter, and you get a Reese's.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I always equate Titans, and Raven to beautiful creatures because it is the only time that after Margie, that I have had that kind of like click with someone where I really feel like we just innately, like we instinctively knew we were doing the same thing from like the moment we talked.
We've been following what you've been doing with DCYA books. I love YA books, but I go through fits and spurts reading them because as I'm reading them, I'm remembering my teenage years and connecting to my teenage self. And while I love that girl, it's also kind of painful for me because it is such a hard time. Do you
Yeah.
find yourself thinking about teenage Kami as you're writing?
Absolutely. I think Raven was the easiest for me to write naturally because she is the most like me, like Teen Cami.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Starfire actually, I was actually really worried would be very hard for me because Starfire is not like me. She's so light and sweet and
Mhm.
kind of like not necessarily happy, but like quirky and like I was much more Raven. I was like darker and like kept to myself and like, was much more insecure, questioning myself all the time. So I related a lot to her. And that's one reason why I wanted to start with her, because I felt like she was my favorite character, but also like she would be the most natural for me to write. So I was like, I want to dive. If I'm going to start in graphic novels, I want to start with something that I feel like I'm going to be really naturally good at. Um, but yeah, it is hard. Uh, Very often, all of my characters are struggling with things, Beast Boy has some body image issues. Starfire has an invisible disability, which is actually it's Ehlers Danlos Syndrome, EDS, which is a disability I have. So I am constantly trying to, I mean, I have to tap into those moments in order to write these characters in an authentic way, but it's also cathartic in a way because these characters, like I had to spend a lot of time after my teenage years kind of like, putting myself back together and, you know, in the 70s and 80s, like I graduated in 1990. So like, most of my teen years, all my teen years I was in the 80s. Like back then there just also wasn't as much understanding of mental health and accessibility to, services and things. And I was definitely someone who struggled with depression and anxiety and ADHD. And I didn't necessarily understand all those things. So it took a lot of time in my 20s to kind of like cobble myself back together in a way that I felt, more like a whole productive human. But what I really try to channel when I'm writing these books is like, what do I wish I had had as a teen? Like what kind
Yeah.
of books? Because I was a reader. So like,
Mhm.
what would I have loved to have been able to read to kind of help me through that? And one of the, my readers always tell me, but one of the through lines, it seems like in almost everything I write, but definitely everything I write for teens is that idea of found family, the idea of defining yourself in like a world that's constantly trying to define you and possibly not accepting you, like being brave enough to be the person you are. And so I try, even though I'm not writing like a message book, I'm trying to like, I want those messages to come through to my readers because sometimes even, I have a lot of readers in my 20s, 30s, 40, adults, and they're sometimes still grappling with those things.
Yeah.
We have a lot of queer readers, a lot of just, a lot of women who are in like different types of, like different types of careers that might be not dominated by, might be dominated by men with fewer women in them. So I just really want all of my readers to feel seen and to feel like someone understands how hard it is to kind of fight the fight to be yourself.
Mm.
Yeah, I feel like I was a Starfire aspiring to be a Raven. Like I wish that I was like dark and moody and mysterious, but I am like the most optimistic and perky person. And even like I also dealt with depression, anxiety in high school. I would love to hear more about including EDS in Kori's story. Like, can you talk
Yeah.
about what inspired that, including your journey with EDS?
So, I have EDS. It's genetic, but I actually didn't find out I had it till my 20s because I just thought I had like, kind of painful joints. Um,
Hmm.
but I had this invisible disability and my daughter actually has it. And she has known because I had my kids like evaluated from the time they were infants.
Mm.
And my daughter manifested pretty early on with it. And she has struggled with it. So I really wanted, I wanted Kori to have this kind of invisible disability because one of the core things about the series is we want all of our readers to feel seen. Like even from the first book, we have visibly disabled kids in every book, even if they're just like in the school halls or whatever. We have queer kids, like we have people of, biracial people, people of many different, colors, like even the colorists, like I'm always really clear. Like, I do not want all the black people to be the same shade of brown. I do not want all the, Latinx people to be the same shade of brown. Like, I want it to always look like a high school. We have, girls wearing headscarves. Like, I really just want this to look like a real high school full of real people, not just populated, there was a time where we really would just see white people in the halls, no matter what any school looked like. I don't want to see that. So, and Gabriel feels the same way. He is from Brazil, which is a very multicultural place. So we're, luckily, like it's very natural for him to draw that way. So we're trying to like constantly incorporate that. But I got a lot of letters early on, especially Beast Boy. There's a boy who has a lower limb prosthetic. And I got a lot of responses from amputees just saying, like, we never see any amputees in books, like ever, like in comics and books and picture book, anywhere. So I I knew already that Starfire was going to have this invisible disability, but I really wanted to lean into it. But the trick was I didn't want her to be defined by it, and I didn't want the whole story to be about it. So one of the things that DC did was for both four and book four and Starfire book five, like we had uh I had a sensitivity reader who was an amputee, and we also had a sensitivity reader who had EDS who was not me.
Mhm.
Because, and she caught a lot of things I wouldn't have caught, because
Mm.
there are, different types of EDS that manifest with very different symptoms and limitations. And by having someone who wasn't me, she would remind me, oh, you know what, that you can do that, but that would be hard for a lot of people. So like it really, and like I said, my editors take that very seriously. They pay these people. Like and at all of my Titans books have been sensitivity read by a sensitivity reader for a specific issue, at least one.
That's
So
awesome.
I appreciate the fact that DC is willing to put the time and the money into something like that, because it really makes a difference. Like it really makes a difference. We had someone who experienced trauma, because there's scenes that are very traumatic for Beast Boy and Raven. And, you know, like, like I said, it's really important to me because, I feel like I've heard people say, oh, it's not my responsibility the way people interpret stuff, blah, blah, blah. And I guess that's fine if you're writing for adults. But to me, if you're writing for children and teens and that's your attitude, you need a new job.
Mm.
Yeah.
Because when you're writing for teenagers and children, it is your responsibility to think about what you're putting out there and the way that that could be shaping or negatively impacting, a kid's perspective or, identity. So I take that, and I think that is again where my teaching comes in, because I have seen that firsthand, how powerful it is to read a book to, my 100% Black classroom of children where the characters are Black and the snowman is Black and Santa is Black. Like those are powerful things versus when I would read them a book where every single person is white. And so, again, I feel like that the time in the classroom is my constant reminder of like the responsibility.
Mm. You also have another book out now, Mixed Up, that tackles dyslexia. And I've read in other interviews that you found getting into the voice of that character a little bit more challenging than your work that you've been doing with Teen Titans. One, I guess, is that true?
Yeah.
And two, why is that?
Well, it's Mixed Up comes out actually in January 21st. It's available like for people like you can read it as a review copy now. It is a story of a little girl in fifth grade who finds out she has dyslexia and her journey of being diagnosed and how it impacts her and especially socially. And she is also kind of a nerd girl. She is a girl, her name is Stella. She's named after my daughter who's also dyslexic, and she has this fandom of this little witch TV show that she watches. And her and her friends cosplay the characters, and she kind of starts struggling socially because this Witchlands TV show comes out with this fun you know like kind of Club Penguin-esque video game. But it has this guidebook, and you have to read the guidebook for all the tips on how to kind of
Mm.
break the levels and play through Zelda. And the guidebook is just very text heavy, and she is struggling with it, and she can't read it and can't keep up with the game and can't play with her friends, and it has all these negative influences for her. But the thing that was really hard about it is I think number one, it's my debut middle grade. I my YA voice is very natural, no matter like how I change it, like what the character is. It is very easy for me to slip into that skin. It was much harder to write middle grade, not just because of the voice, but because I feel like, at that time, it's such a specific age. Kids, and by the time you're YA, even though you're emotionally not an adult, you're doing kind of pre-adult things. In elementary school, it's very specific to like your grade and age. Like third graders do not do the things that fifth graders do, and vice versa. So it was a lot of like constantly checking myself. And then the other thing was tricky is she is diagnosed and also gets remediation, support for the dyslexia. And like I had to use, I am a reading specialist, but I have not been in the classroom, for over a decade. So what I did is not current. And I also wasn't a dyslexia specialist. Like just people who teach and help with this support for dyslexia have very specific training. So I had to consult with someone who, like that all the time to be like, okay, is this called this? What, and she would say, nope, those aren't the cards you would use. You would use these. So it also had this really specific kind of, technical element to it that my Titans books, I might like look up DARPA, like for, Cyborg, I looked up like, DARPA prosthetic, how they use their prosthetics and develop things, but like, it's not the same level of specificity down to dialogue. So I just felt a lot more kind of like stressed to make it right. Whereas with Cyborg, like it's really fun. I get to like, I research the prosthetics and then I get to kind of mix that with with fantasy prosthetics. So again, there's always kind of an element of invention. Whereas with this one, I had to really make sure everything was right. And I've said this many times, it is way easier to write fantasy and sci-fi for me than to write contemporary. Writing about total 100% realistic to me is so much harder. So anytime I've had a 100% realistic book, which has only been, this is only my third, has always been much more difficult projects. Like I can write an X-Files or a DC Titans book, a Joker book easily versus having to write a story about real people just doing regular things with no magic or no superpowers.
One thing that I love about YA books and even middle grade books is there is this kind of obligation to be aspirational. Like even no matter what your character is going through, the reader needs to know that they have the tools to get out of that situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But also aspirational as in like, what are teenagers actually focused on? And I think a big one is your crush, is falling in love, is am I beautiful, and all of that kind of stuff. How is it handling teen romance?
So it depends on the book. For Titans, I had a feeling, well, number one, I knew I wanted these to be very kind of sweet romances. Like, I mean, like there's kissing. There's, nobody's taking clothes off. There's, nothing like that. And one of the reasons I knew I wanted to do that was because having my own kids who are Titans fans and how young my daughter was as a Titans fan, I had a hunch I was going to get a lot of kids that were way younger than YA reading these books, which it turned out to be. And one of the things that is kind of very on brand for me is the way I start a series is the way I end a series, meaning like if there's only kissing in book 1, you're not going to suddenly have people with no clothes on in book 6, because I know that once parents and teachers give my books to students, they're not going to read book 8. You know what I mean? They're reading book 1 and 2. So I want them to feel confident that what the kind of issues that they see in the beginning is the like level of seriousness you're going to see throughout. So they do grapple with real things. Raven's a foster kid. Beast Boy's struggling with body image issues, and even like learns his parents lied to him and has this huge rift with his parents. Like there's real issues going on in these books, but like that is the level of the issues. Beast Boy and Raven fall in love, and Raven even has a romance in her solo book before she meets Beast Boy, which people were like, that is not Beast Boy. But again, and they have real, issues like, lying or, do I trust this guy? Do I want to date this guy? But again, like, and when it comes to the physicalness, that is also, kept like, it's very intentional. And also, while I was doing Beast Boy Ehlers Raven, Gabriel had come out as Ace, and which I knew, but wasn't like public. But one of the things that was also very important to me in Beast Boy Ehlers Raven is like, a lot of the connection that you see between them is not physical. And they're not physically touching, because I really wanted to show that like how you can fall in love with a person where whether or not you're attracted, like you're like, it is about your emotional connection to that person. So, and there are parts of that story, I won't give it away, where there are reasons they literally can't touch. And those to me were some of the most romantic scenes in the book. And again, you don't have to be ace to know that. Like, it's just like how we fall in love with our best friend, like you find your person, or you find, you find connection with people. And I wanted to kind of show that, a lot of us make these, people fall in love with their best friend. Like, a lot of people make these emotional connections with people long before they even realize they have romantic feelings. And that is kind of a theme in a lot of even my prose novels. I always want to show different kinds of love between mother and child, love between, adoptive or foster parents and their kids, love between best friends, that siblings, like those kinds of love to me are just as valid. But I also like the idea of I also it's very important to me to show healthy romances and what to do in unhealthy situations. I have like whole novels about this, but in these books, like there are moments like we have an original character, Max, who ends up in having some romance with Damien, and like he is behaving poorly and she like calls him on it. She's like not having it. And like, I want girls to see that. I want them to see that, like, when a guy or your girlfriend or someone talks to you this way, this is not, how you respond in this way. You do not say, okay, or you do not like let them get away with it. So it's also important to me to show healthy relationships and models for healthy relationships, because I experienced relationship violence and stalking during high school and part of college. And I have an entire novel called Broken Beautiful Hearts about that experience. That is really for 15 and up. It is very, it's has some darkness in it. And I feel like part of, again, I wish there had been more books like that for me as a teenager, where that's kind of why I wrote that book. Because I was like, if I had had a book where I had known what to do instead of doing all the wrong things, which is what I did, I would have reacted really differently. And that book is kind of my do-over, where that character does all the things I wish I had done. And she does the things that I would want, somebody to do. So again, I feel like I'm always trying to show kids a different way, because sometimes, number one, even if you have great parents, no teenager my own teens don't want to listen to me. You don't want your parents giving you the answers. And some people don't even have that. They don't have either families, or they don't have families that are healthy. So I always want, our books to, especially because they're visual. Gabriel's art is so strong and it creates so much empathy. Like, I really want kids to be able to use that, and adults too, to empower themselves. I feel like that's one of the things comics is so special about comics. Comics gives us tools like to face a scary, dark world, that I don't think you get from a prose novel. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I always loved reading them, but I think I really fell in love with writing them even more than prose books, because I feel like, they empower you in a way that I just don't think you get solely from words.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly feel that way. Kami, thank you so much for hanging out and talking Starfire with us today. Maybe it's because Lisa and I are also two former classroom teachers. We feel like you bring a lot of teacher empathy to your writing that is extremely attractive to us as readers.
Well, thank you so much. Like I said, I am a teacher at heart. Like, teachers and librarians are my people. So, I also always want to write books that I know that teachers and librarians can hand to kids,
Yeah.
hand to teens.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kami. And there you go. That's our conversation with Kami Garcia about Teen Titans Starfire, which is out now wherever fine books are sold. I do want to say, if you do go to a Barnes & Noble, there is a Barnes & Noble exclusive cover to this book that I like a lot. And that's the version that Lisa and I now have.
I was super inspired by everything Kami had to say about sensitivity reading.
Yes.
And I think that shouldn't just be a thing for YA books. I think it should be a thing for any human books.
Yeah.
Even if the decision is to change nothing about the story, I think that that creators should know and publishers should know if they're putting out a book that's going to hurt people's feelings or repel people.
Agreed 100%. And I was really happy that DC Comics was willing to pay
Yes.
for a sensitivity reader, right? I think DC's doing a lot of really great stuff with their YA line. And one of my favorite things about this conversation occurred off mic because we kept chatting with Kami and Michael from DC, the publicist over there. And we were just talking about how art can have a tremendous impact on the reader. And we are going to be seeking art a lot in these coming months, these coming years. And it's nice to see everyone at DC being so aware of what they can do with their stories. And I think that's one of the reasons why DC is having such a moment right now, is because their writers and their artists are thematically forward, message forward. And that's also probably why we've been covering DC a lot more on Comic Book Couples Counseling in 2024.
Talking about what books can do, what is on the horizon for next week?
Well, we're going to do 2 more episodes next week, starting off our December programming. Both will focus on issues from the Horizon Experiment and Image Comics.
See what I did there?
I did, and I appreciated it, Lisa. The first episode is going to be with Vita Ayala and Skylar Partridge talking about their one-shot Finders Keepers, which is a reverse Indiana Jones-like story. And then we're going to close next week with Jay Holtham and Michael Lee Harris talking about Mother Blanking Monsters, which is basically an Evil Dead for blurs and has a very sumptuous cartoony style, an unexpected style, but a very welcomed style.
And of course, we have our upcoming film club screening, co-sponsored, as always, by Four Color Fantasies. We're screening Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 at the Alamo Drafthouse in Winchester, Virginia. That's going to be on December 15th at 4 p.m. It's a Sunday. And, you know, it's my birthday month.
Oh, so come celebrate and have some cake and some pizza with Lisa.
The most important birthday in December.
That's right. Also, look in the show notes for a link to our TeePublic page.
Oh, yeah.
We have merch finally designed and illustrated by Jesse Lonergan with lettering from Hassan Atzmani Elhau. We're really proud of this new logo, and we want you to wear it on your chests.
And in the spirit of the season, all of our proceeds from our merch store and our Patreon for November and December are going directly to the Trevor Project. What a great gift. A t-shirt from our merch store with art by Jesse Lonergan. Pair that with a copy of Man's Best.
That's right.
Where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you, Brad?
You can find me on most social medias, including Blue Sky at Mouthdork. If you have words of affirmation for our logo, send them to Jesse Lonergan at Jesse Lonergan on Blue Sky or on Instagram, Jesse.Lonergan. Lisa, where can our listeners send the words of affirmation to you?
I'm always accepting words of affirmation at Sidewalk Siren on some social medias, including Blue Sky. If you'd like to spend more quality time with us, you can subscribe to us on Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, Audible, Apple Podcasts, or whatever app you choose. We're everywhere. If you'd like to get exclusive, you can join our Patreon, where you'll get more content, including weekly bonus episodes.
If you'd like to reach out and touch us electronically, you can email the podcast, cbccpodcast@gmail.com. You can visit our website, comicbookcouplescounseling.com, or follow us on all the socials at CBCC Podcast.
You can give us the gift of 5 stars on Audible or Apple Podcasts. And if you'd like to do an active service, why not write a review or leave a comment on the show while you're there?
Yes, please.
We are fluent and receptive in all 5 love languages. It really warms our hearts and helps the pod.
So until next time, friends, keep your love tank full.
And your psychic rapport open.
Doopy doopy. Bum bum ba da bum bum ba da ba.